You think you know a person. You raise them, you feed them, you teach them to tie their shoes, to look a man in the eye when they shake his hand. You think you know the very fabric of their soul. I believed that. For 78 years, I believed that with every fiber of my being. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. My name is Alistair Vans, Lord Hemlocke, and this is not a story about legacy. It's a story about the poison that legacy can become. It's about the sound a heart makes when it doesn't just break, but when it shatters and the pieces are used as weapons by the very hands you once held so tight. This is the truth behind the tarnished title. It all started to crumble on a day that should have been perfect. My 80th birthday. The great hall of Hemlocke Manor was buzzing, not with genuine warmth, mind you, but with a calculated, simpering kind of cheer. The air was thick with the smell of old money and expensive perfume, and underneath it all, the sharp, metallic scent of greed. I stood there, leaning on my cane, a prop more than a necessity, and I watched them. My children, my heirs. They moved through the crowd like sharks, graceful and smiling, but their eyes were constantly calculating, assessing, measuring the distance between themselves and the title, the land, the power. My eldest, Arthur, clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. Looking strong, father, he boomed, his voice dripping with a false bonhomie that made my skin crawl. The estate is in remarkable shape. I was just telling Lady Covington how efficiently I've managed the tenant renewals this quarter. I. Not we, not you. I. He was already speaking as if it were his. And his wife, Penelope, hovered nearby, her smile a tight, thin line. We just want you to be able to relax, Alistair, she purred. You've earned your rest. Let Arthur bear the burdens now. Then there was my daughter, Beatrice. She swooped in, air-kissing my cheek, her touch as cold as the family jewels. Don't you listen to them, Daddy, she cooed, her voice like poisoned honey. You're not going anywhere, but you must be practical. We all must. Arthur has ideas about the land, modern ideas. I think it's best if I oversee the transition of the art collection. For its protection, of course. She said protection, while looking at a priceless Titian like a vulture eyeing a dying animal. I just nodded and smiled my old man's smile, the one they all mistook for senility. I felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't a celebration of my life, it was a vulture's convention, and I was the slowly cooling carcass in the center of the room. And then I saw him, Kyle, my youngest grandchild, Beatrice's boy. He was tucked away in a corner, far from the glittering throng, trying to discreetly feed a stray dog a can of under the curtain. He was 19, all elbows and anxiety, with a heart so open and unguarded it was practically a liability in this family. He saw me looking and flinched, dropping the canop. The dog snatched it and scurried away. Kyle gave me a weak, apologetic smile, his face flushing crimson. He was a disaster, an embarrassment. The family called him Kyle, the kind behind his back, and they never, ever meant it as a compliment. In that moment, watching his genuine, flustered shame over a dropped piece of food, something cracked open inside me. A plan began to form, not a plan of love or of legacy, a plan of exquisite, perfect revenge. The party wound down and the true colors started to show. They thought I had gone upstairs to bed, but I lingered on the balcony overlooking the library. Their voices carried up, clear and sharp, stripped of all pretense. It's unconscionable. Arthur was snarling. The amount of capital tied up in the north pastures is staggering. We could develop that land, Penelope. Housing estates, shopping centers. The profit would be astronomical. But the tenants, Arthur, came Beatrice's cooler, more cunning voice. The sentimental value alone, Father would never allow it. Arthur snorted. Father is a relic, a charming, doddering relic. His sentimental value has cost this family millions. Once the title and the estate are mine, those pastures will be the first to go. You'll have the papers drawn up next week. Yours? Beatrice's voice turned to ice. And what makes you so certain of that, dear brother? You, with your brutish understanding of business and no sense of subtlety. Do you really think Father is blind to your ambitions? He knows I'm the only one with the strength to carry this family forward, Arthur shot back. You'd sell the silverware to buy a new necklace and call it an investment. How dare you? My management of the family's assets is a joke, a transparent grab for whatever you can get your hands on. I listened, my hand gripping the cold stone of the balustrade so hard I thought it might crack. This was it, the heart of the rot. It wasn't about the family name. It wasn't about honor. It was a bare-knuckle fight over spoils. I felt a cold fury, so absolute it was almost peaceful. They had signed their own sentences in that moment. The next morning, I called my solicitor, Mr. Thistlethwaite, a man so discreet he was practically a ghost. He arrived, a wisp of a man with a leather briefcase that looked older than he was. I laid out my new will, not the one had drafted a decade ago, the sensible one that left the title and the bulk of the estate to Arthur with generous provisions for Beatrice, no. This was something else entirely. When I finished explaining, Thistlethwaite paled. My lord, he stammered, adjusting his spectacles. This is unprecedented. The ramifications the family strife are you quite sure. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Thistlethwaite, I said, my voice steady. They want to fight. It'll give them a war. But it will be a war of my choosing, on my terms. He sighed, a sound of pure professional distress, but he unclasped his briefcase and began to take notes. The pen scratching on the paper was the sound of destiny being rewritten, or perhaps unraveling. A week later, I decided to test the waters. I summoned them all to the library, Arthur, Penelope, Beatrice, and even Kyle, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. I sat behind the great oak desk, the same desk my father and his father had sat behind. Children, I began, feigning a weariness I didn't entirely feel. You've been thinking about the future, about this family's legacy. You could almost see their ears prick up. Arthur leaned forward, trying to look concerned. Beatrice folded her hands neatly in her lap, a picture of attentive devotion. The world is changing, I continued, and perhaps it's time for me to change with it. In considering new directions for the title, Arthur couldn't contain himself. New directions, father. Nonsense. The direction is clear. It's about strength, continuity. The Vans name must be upheld with dignity and power. Power? I mused, tapping a finger on the desk. But what is power, Arthur? Is it bulldozing pastures for shopping centers? He froze. His eyes widened just a fraction. He hadn't realized I'd overheard. I merely meant, and you, Beatrice, I turned to her, my gaze mild. You speak of protecting our heritage. But which part? The art, the silver, the land. She gave me her most winning smile. All of it, Daddy. It all must be protected from short-sightedness. She shot a venomous glance at Arthur. Protection, I said, letting the word hang in the air. What if true protection isn't about holding on tightly, but about letting go? What if the future of the Vans' legacy doesn't lie in the expected hands? The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Even Kyle looked up, confused by the sudden tension. What are you saying, Father? Arthur asked, his voice dangerously low. I looked at each of them in turn, meeting their greedy, anxious eyes. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. This was the first move, the first twist of the knife. In saying, I said softly, that the measure of a man isn't in what he builds, but in what he leaves behind. And perhaps have been measuring you all by the wrong stick. I saw the panic flash in Beatrice's eyes, the confusion on Penelope's face, the sheer, unadulterated rage beginning to simmer in Arthur's. They were off balance. They were scared. And it was everything I had hoped for, but I had only just begun. The real revelation was still to come. A revelation that would not just shock them, but would tear the very foundation of this family apart. Because I knew then, with a certainty that chilled my bones, that I was not just going to disappoint them. I was going to destroy them. And I was going to use the kindest, most innocent soul in this cursed family to do it. The game was afoot. And I, Alistair Vans, was the only one who knew the rules. Little did I know, however, that even the most perfect plans have a way of twisting back on themselves. I thought I was the puppeteer, pulling all the strings. but I was about to discover that one of my puppets was made of stronger stuff than I ever imagined, and that discovery would start with a single, quiet question from the last person I ever expected to challenge me. It was Kyle. Of all people, it was Kyle. He approached me later that evening, after the others had left in a state of high dudgeon and poorly concealed alarm. I was in the conservatory, tending to my orchids, the one piece I had left. I heard a soft cough behind me. Grandfather. I turned. He was standing there, wringing his hands, his shoulders hunched. He looked terrified. Yes. Kyle. What is it? I asked, perhaps a little too sharply. I was still riding the high of my manipulation, and his nervous energy was an annoyance. He took a shaky breath. It's just in the library today. You were talking about the legacy, and not leaving it to the expected hands. I said, turning back to my orchid, carefully wiping a leaf with a damp cloth. Your mother and your uncle have very fixed ideas. But he hesitated, and I could feel him gathering his courage. But why are you trying to make them angry? I stopped. The cloth stilled on the leaf. That was not the question I was expecting. Not from him. I had anticipated greed, or pleading, or even tears. Not perception. I turned slowly to face him fully. I'm not trying to make them angry, Kyle. I'm trying to make them see. See what? He asked, and his eyes, for the first time, held a clarity that was unnerving. They weren't the simple, kind eyes I thought they were. They were deeply, painfully perceptive. See the truth, I said, evading. The truth about what? About how much they want your money. He said, and there was no malice in his voice, only a profound sadness. Grandfather, they've always been like this. Everyone knows it. Even me. I felt a jolt. Even me. The family idiot. The embarrassment. He saw it. He had always seen it. And the realization was a cold splash of water on my vengeful fervor. For a moment, my grand plan felt cheap, tawdry. I was playing a game a naive boy could see right through. I felt my hands start to shake. Not from age, but from a sudden, terrifying doubt. Was I any better than they were? I was using the tools of their trade deception, manipulation to fight them. Was I becoming the very monster I sought to punish? I looked at Kyle, truly looked at him. He wasn't just a tool. He was a person, a good person, and I was about to drop the full weight of my bitterness and revenge onto his slender, unprepared shoulders. The sheer monstrousness of it hit me like a physical blow. But then I saw Arthur's face in my mind, sneering about the north pastures. I heard Beatrice's voice, plotting over the art collection. The cold fury returned, hardening my resolve. It was too late for second thoughts. The machinery was in motion. It's not about what they want, Kyle, I said, my voice hardening to match my heart. It's about what is right. And you will understand soon enough. I turned my back on him, a deliberate dismissal. I heard him stand there for a moment longer, and then the soft sound of his retreating footsteps. I felt a pang of something close to regret, but I smothered it. There was no room for regret in what was to come. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly foreseen, was that my conversation with Kyle had set a new chain of events in motion. He wasn't just going to be a passive participant in my drama. He had seen the crack in my armor, the flicker of doubt. And he, in his own quiet way, was about to become a player in the game. Because later that night, unable to sleep, tormented by my words and the palpable tension in the house, Kyle did something he had never done before. He went to the one person he thought he could trust with his fears. And that single, simple act of seeking comfort would unleash a chain reaction of betrayal that would make my own scheme look like child's play. He went to his mother. You know, there's a particular silence that falls in an old house like Hemlocke Manor when the world is holding its breath. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a thick, heavy quiet, full of echoes of things said and screams yet to come. That was the silence that greeted me the morning after I spoke to Kyle in the conservatory. The air itself felt charged, pregnant with the storm I had set in motion. And I felt a cold knot in my gut, a premonition that my carefully laid plans had already been contaminated. I should have known. I should have known that a heart as open as Kyle's wouldn't just keep my questions to himself. but I was so wrapped up in my own grand design, my own brilliant revenge, that I'd forgotten the most basic rule of warfare: know your terrain. And Kyle's terrain was a desperate need for approval, a need his mother, my daughter Beatrice, had exploited since he was in diapers. I came down for breakfast, leaning a little more heavily on my cane for effect. The dining room was a tableau of forced normalcy. Arthur was hidden behind the Financial Times, the rustle of the pages sounding like gunshots in the quiet. Penelope was meticulously dissecting a grapefruit, her movements precise, angry. Beatrice was sipping her tea, her posture perfect, but her eyes were everywhere, missing nothing. And Kyle was slumped in his chair, pushing a piece of kedgeree around his plate. He wouldn't meet my gaze. The guilt was radiating off him in waves. "Sleep well, father?" Arthur asked, not lowering his paper. His voice was a low grumble, a challenge disguised as courtesy. "Well enough," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. The carved mahogany throne. The mind races at our age, Arthur. So much past to ponder, so much future to consider. I saw Beatrice's knuckles whiten around her teacup. She set it down with a delicate clink that seemed to echo through the room. "The future is all we think about, Daddy," she said, her voice sweet as arsenic. "Especially the future of this family. We were just discussing it last night, weren't we, Kyle?" Kyle flinched as if Shed struck him. He mumbled something incoherent into his plate. "OH," I prompted, spreading a napkin on my lap with deliberate slowness. "And what wisdom did my grandson have to impart on the future of our great lineage?" Beatrice's smile was a razor blade. "Oh, Hayes always so thoughtful. He was just concerned. He said you seemed troubled yesterday, that you were talking about changing things in ways that might cause friction." The little traitor had run straight to her. I felt a hot flash of anger, not at Kyle, poor stupid, malleable Kyle, but at myself. It'd been clumsy. It underestimated the boy's need for a confidant, and it overestimated my own ability to be the only influence in his life. The plan was leaking, and the vultures were already circling the scent of weakness. "Friction," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. I looked directly at Kyle. "Is that what you thought, Kyle? That my desire to see this familyless legacy secured in the right hands would cause friction?" Kyle looked up, his eyes wide with panic, trapped between his grandfather and his mother. "I just meant you said about not leaving it to the expected. Beatrice pounced on the word. "Now, that is a fascinating term, isn't it? One might think the expected would be the eldest son. The one with the experience, the strength." She glanced pointedly at Arthur, who slowly lowered his newspaper. The temporary alliance between them, forged in their shared greed, was visibly cracking under the pressure I was applying. I had to admire Beatrice's skill. She was using my own ambiguity to turn Arthur against me more directly, positioning herself as the voice of reason. Arthur's eyes were cold chips of flint. "Is there something or someone else you have in mind, father?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because if there is, I think we have a right to know. We have a right to understand what game you're playing." The air left the room. Even Penelope stopped her surgical dissection of the grapefruit. This was the confrontation. Sooner than it wanted, but it was here. I gave them my best, most benign smile. The doddering old man. "Game, Arthur. My boy. This is not a game. This is our history. This is our blood. I'm merely re-evaluating. The world values different things now. Perhaps strength isn't about bulldozers. Perhaps it's about compassion. Perhaps legacy isn't about holding on to what you have, but about what you give away." I let my gaze drift to Kyle, who looked utterly bewildered. I was throwing him to the wolves, and I felt a sickening lurch in my soul. But it was too late to turn back. Arthur stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the parquet floor. "Compassion? Giving away?" he roared. "Have you lost your mind? This estate, this title, is not some charity to be doled out to the feel-good cause of the month. It's a monument. It's a responsibility. It requires a firm hand, not a soft heart. And you think your hand is the firmest, Arthur?" I asked mildly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. You think your vision of shopping centers and parking lots is what our ancestors built this for. His face purpled. How dare you? I'm trying to secure this family's future, to make it relevant, powerful. While Beatrice interjected smoothly, rising to stand beside her brother, a picture of united fury, am trying to protect its soul. But this vague, dangerous talk of unexpected hands, it threatens everything, Daddy. It threatens to make us a laughingstock. They were united, in that moment, against me. My own children. I had achieved the exact opposite of what I wanted. I had forced them into an alliance. The knot in my stomach tightened. I had miscalculated. Badly. I see, I said, my voice soft. I looked from Arthur's rage-inflamed face to Beatrice's coldly furious one. The two of you are in agreement, then. The legacy must be preserved. As you see fit? Damn right, Arthur spat. It's the only way, Beatrice affirmed. I nodded slowly, as if in defeat. I let my shoulders slump, let the facade of the feeble old man take over completely. Then perhaps you are right. Perhaps I am tired. Perhaps my judgment is not what it was. I saw the triumph flash in their eyes. A quick, greedy glance exchanged between them. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd bullied me back into my corner. I think I shall rest in my study, I murmured, pushing myself up from the table. I have much to think about. I shuffled out of the room, playing the part to perfection. But inside, the cold fire was burning brighter than ever. They had shown their hand. Their unity was a sham, a temporary truce born of panic, and I knew it would shatter the moment real pressure was applied. And I knew exactly how to apply it. I went to my study and did something I should have done weeks ago. I called Mr. Thistlethwaite and told him to expedite the new will. The signing would happen tomorrow. The bombshell would be dropped before they had time to fortify their defenses. But the rest of that day was a special kind of hell. The atmosphere in the manor was toxic. Arthur and Beatrice circled each other like prize fighters, their temporary alliance already showing strain. They tried to pump me for information, separately, each thinking they could coax the real plan out of the confused old man. Arthur found me in the library. Father, he began, trying for a tone of conciliatory reason. About this morning I spoke out of turn. I apologize. The pressure of it all you understand. But you must see reason. Beatrice, she's not capable. She'll bleed the estate dry with her frivolities. The title needs a leader. A CEO? Later, Beatrice cornered me in the rose garden. Daddy, Arthur is a bull in a china shop. He'll destroy everything you and grandfather built. He has no subtlety, no grace. The legacy needs a guardian, a curator, someone who appreciates its finer qualities. I nodded and mumbled noncommittally to both of them, stoking their individual fears and ambitions. I felt like a master conductor orchestrating a symphony of their own greed. But the guilt over Kyle was a constant, discordant note. I saw him wandering the halls, a ghost in his own home, more lost and anxious than ever. He was the collateral damage in my war, and the sight of him twisted something in me. The day of the signing arrived. Thistlethwaite came, his face graver than ever. The document lay on my desk, a simple piece of paper that was about to detonate a dynasty. My hand did not shake as I signed my name. Alistair Vans. It was the steadiest it felt in years. This was my shot across the bow. This was my declaration of war. But a war needs an audience. It needs witnesses. And I decided I wouldn't just let them read it in some solicitor's office days from now. No. I would have a reading. Here. Tonight. I would see the looks on their faces. I would watch the shock and the fury unfold in real time. It was cruel. It was petty. And in that moment, it felt like justice. I summoned them all to the library after dinner. The same setting as my first little tease. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the solemnity of the occasion. Arthur and Beatrice sat on one sofa, a tense, united front. Penelope sat primly in a wingback chair, and Kyle sat on a footstool in the corner, as if trying to make himself as small as possible. Thistlethwaite stood by the fireplace, holding the document. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Lord Hemlocke has asked me to read the salient points of his last will and testament," he began, his voice reedy and nervous. I sat behind my desk, watching. I wish I could describe the feeling. It was a cocktail of cold fury, vengeful satisfaction, and a deep, profound sadness that threatened to drown me. I was about to break my family, irrevocably. To my daughter-in-law, Penelope Vans, I leave the sum of £200,000 and the jewelry collection of her late mother-in-law, Thistlethwaite Reed. Penelope's lips tightened. It was a generous sum, but it was a pittance compared to the estate. A sop. She knew it. She shot a furious glance at Arthur. To my daughter, Beatrice Croftley, I leave the entirety of the art collection, the contents of the London house, and a trust fund to be managed in perpetuity for her line. Beatrice's eyes widened. The art collection was worth millions. The London house was prime real estate. For a moment, triumph flashed across her face. She had gotten what she wanted. She had won. She looked at Arthur with smug victory. But then the reality set in. The art and the house were assets, but they were not the title. They were not the land. They were not the power. Arthur was staring straight ahead, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He knew what was coming. The core of the estate was his. It had to be. It was his birthright. Thistlethwaite took a deep, shaky breath. He couldn't quite meet anyone's eyes. And regarding the title of Lord Hemlocke, the Hemlocke estate, its lands, properties, and all remaining assets not otherwise specified, the room was so quiet I could hear the blood pounding in my own ears. I, Alistair Vans, being of sound mind, Thistlethwaite's voice faltered. He looked at me, a final, silent plea. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. He looked back at the document. "Do hereby bequeath it entirely and in perpetuity to my grandson, Kyle Croftley." There. It was done. For a full 5 seconds, there was nothing. No sound. It was as if the words had sucked all the air from the room, leaving a perfect, vacuum-sealed silence. Then it broke. Beatrice was the first to move. She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Kyle," she whispered. Then, louder, "Kyle." Arthur stood up, slowly, deliberately. His face was not red with rage anymore. It was pale, a terrifying, corpse-like pale. He turned to me. His eyes were dead. "This is a joke," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "A sick, senile joke." "It is not a joke, Mr. Vans," Thistlethwaite squeaked, holding up the document. "It is entirely legal and binding." "Kyle," Beatrice shrieked, now on her feet, pointing a trembling finger at her son, who had shrunk even further into his corner, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. "Him. You're leaving it to him? The boy who can't even order a coffee without stammering. The boy who's failed out of every course HEIR's ever taken. You're making him Lord Hemlocke." "It seems I am," I said, my voice calm, though my hands were clenched into fists under the desk. This was the moment. This was the payoff. But HEIR's a child. An idiot. Beatrice screamed, her composure utterly shattered. "I am his mother. I will have to manage it for him. This is just a backhanded way of giving it to me." "You've given it to me?" "No, Beatrice," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a knife. "I have given it to Kyle. The management, the decisions, they will be his. And his alone." The implication hung in the air. She would not control it. Her meal ticket, her key to society, was now in the hands of her least competent child. She stared at me, and I saw the exact moment the understanding dawned. It wasn't a gift. It was a punishment. For her, for Arthur. For all of them. Arthur took a step towards my desk. "You pathetic old fool," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost quiet. "You have just destroyed 300 years of history. You have made us the laughingstock of the entire peerage. For what? For spite? Because we cared about the future. I have saved it from you." "Arthur," I shot back, finally letting my own anger show. "I have saved it from your bulldozers and your parking lots. From your greed? You call me greedy." He laughed, a horrible, broken sound. "You, who's hoarded this power your whole life, only to throw it away like a petulant child breaking a toy he doesn't want anyone else to have. This isn't justice, father. This is insanity. It was Penelope who spoke next, her voice icy cold. We will contest this, Alistair. We will have you declared mentally incompetent. No judge in the land will uphold this travesty. You are welcome to try, I said, meeting her gaze. But my physicians have already certified me. Thistlethwaite has recorded my lucidity. You will waste a fortune in legal fees only to lose. Spectacularly, the room erupted into chaos. Beatrice was sobbing, screaming incoherently at Kyle, who was now crying silent tears, curled up on the footstool. Arthur was pacing, running his hands through his hair, muttering curses. Penelope was staring into the fire, her face a mask of cold, calculated hatred. And in the midst of it all, I sucked. I had won. I had exacted my revenge. I had taken the thing they wanted most, and I had given it to the one person they considered beneath contempt. I had tarnished the title, yes, but I had tarnished them first. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. But as I looked at Kyle, at the sheer, utter devastation on his young face, I felt nothing but a hollow, aching void. I had wanted to hurt my children, and I had succeeded. But I had also destroyed an innocent boy in the process. I had made him a pawn, a weapon, and now I was leaving him alone on a battlefield surrounded by enemies, including his own mother. The shouting eventually subsided into a furious, seething quiet. Arthur stormed out, followed by Penelope. Beatrice finally stopped screaming at Kyle and instead grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet. "Come on," she snarled, not as a mother to a son, but as a warden to a prisoner. "We're leaving. We have plans to make." She dragged him from the room. He looked back at me once, his eyes filled with a betrayal so deep it stole the breath from my lungs. Then he was gone. The library was empty, save for me and a very uncomfortable Mr. Thistlethwaite. "My lord," he began. "Leave me, Thistlethwaite," I whispered, my voice suddenly old and tired. "Just leave me?" He left quickly, gratefully. I was alone. The fire crackled. The shadows danced. I had gotten everything I wanted. I had won my war. So why did I feel like the greatest monster in the history of this cursed house? The silence gave me no answers, but it did give me a warning, a cold prickle on the back of my neck. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. I had declared it, but they would fight it, and they would not fight fair. Because as the front door of Hemlocke Manor slammed shut, echoing through the silent house, I knew with a chilling certainty what would happen next. Beatrice wouldn't just contest the will. She would do something far more effective, far more insidious. She would go to Kyle, and she would begin the process of turning my weapon against me. The next 48 hours were a study in quiet desperation. The manor felt like a gilded tomb. The staff moved through the halls with hushed steps and nervous glances, aware that a seismic shift had occurred. I kept to my study, pretending to read, but mostly just staring out the window at the rolling grounds that were, technically, no longer mine to worry about. The weight of what I had done pressed down on me, a physical burden. I had dreamed of this moment for months, fantasized about the look on their faces. But the reality was ashes in my mouth. I had expected rage. I had expected legal threats. What I hadn't expected was the silence. No phone calls. No letters from solicitors. Nothing from Arthur or Beatrice. It was the silence of the deep breath before the plunge, and it was infinitely more frightening than their shouting. It was Mrs. Higgins, my housekeeper for 40 years, who broke the silence on the second day. She came in with my tea, her face lined with concern. "My lord," she said, setting the tray down with a soft clatter. "There's a man at the gate. A journalist. From the Times?" My blood ran cold. "What does he want?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. Hayes asking for a comment on the succession crisis. He said Hayes heard rumors that the estate has been left to two young Master Kyles, so it was beginning. They weren't going to fight me in the courts first. They were going to fight me in the court of public opinion. They were going to make us a spectacle. This had Beatrice's fingerprints all over it. A legal challenge could be slow, expensive, and uncertain. But a scandal could force a hand. It could pressure physicians to reconsider their certification of my sanity. It could make life so unbearable that I might be forced to recant. Tell him no comment, I said, my voice tight. And if any others come, have them removed from the property. Yes, my lord, she said, and hurried out. I sat there, the tea growing cold. This was their opening move, a leak to the press. It was clever, vicious, but clever. I had to admire the brutality of it. They were willing to drag the Vans name through the mud to get what they wanted. They were proving my point for me, even as they tried to defeat me. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was an old friend, Lord Covington. His voice was strained, embarrassed. Alistair, old boy, heard a rather strange rumor floating around the club today. Something about your will. People are talking. Said some reporter was sniffing around. Nothing to it, I hope. Gossip and nonsense. Charles, I said, trying to sound breezy. My children are displeased with some of the provisions. You know how these things are. Of course, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Just be careful, Alistair. These things have a way of taking on a life of their own. He hung up, and I knew. The story was out. The laughingstock was being assembled, piece by piece. I felt a hot flush of shame. Not for myself, but for the name. For my fathers before me. I had wanted to tarnish the title, but facing the reality of it, the sniggers and the pity from men like Covington was a sharper pain than I had anticipated. The isolation was becoming absolute. I was a king in a castle of my own making, and the walls were closing in. I needed to see Kyle. I needed to know what was happening to him. I needed to explain. To apologize? I didn't know what I would say, but the need to see him was a physical ache. I drove to Beatrice's London townhouse myself. It was a bold, perhaps foolish, move, but I was past caring. The house was a tall, narrow building in a fashionable square. It looked sterile, unwelcoming. I rang the bell. A maid answered, her eyes wide when she recognized me. Lord Hemlocke. I'll see if Mrs. Croftly is at home. She left me standing on the doorstep. It was a calculated insult. Beatrice was home, her car was in the drive. After a few minutes, the maid returned. Mrs. Croftly will see you in the drawing room. I was shown into a room that was all sharp edges and cold colors. Beatrice was standing by the fireplace, dressed in a severe black suit. She looked like a corporate raider. She didn't offer me a seat. Daddy, she said, her voice flat, to what do I owe this surprise? I want to see Kyle, Beatrice. Kyle is indisposed, she said. He's under a great deal of stress. Thanks to you. What have you told him? I demanded, my composure cracking. What have you done? What have I done? She laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm protecting my son from the catastrophic mistake of his grandfather. I'm doing what any mother would do. Protecting him or programming him. I shot back. I know how you operate, Beatrice. You're in his ear, aren't you? Telling him Hayes not capable. Telling him he needs you to handle it. Telling him to sign things over to you. Her eyes glittered with cold fury. Get out. Not until I see him. You have no right. She snapped. You gave up any right to him when you made him your puppet. You used him? You think I don't see it? This was never about Kyle. This was about you spiting Arthur and me. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded. Now live with the consequences. But you will not see him. Not until Hayes of a mind to see you. And by then, I can assure you, his mind will be quite made up. The threat was clear. She was alienating him from me. Completely. And she had him under her roof, isolated, vulnerable. She had all the time in the world to warp his perception, to twist his grief and confusion into a weapon against me. I felt a surge of helpless rage. I was losing. Already, I was losing. My grand gesture was unraveling because I had underestimated the most basic human element, a mother's possessive, manipulative love. If you harm that boy, Beatrice, I began, but my threat sounded weak, empty. Harm him? She whispered, taking a step towards me. I am saving him from you. Now get out of my house. I left. There was nothing else to do. I drove back to Hemlocke Manor in a fog of despair. The battle lines were drawn, but the enemy had already taken the high ground. They had Kyle. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my room, the events of the past few days replaying in a hellish loop. The look on Kyle's face, Beatrice's cold fury, Arthur's dead-eyed rage, the journalist at the gate. I had wanted to teach them a lesson about greed, but I had only unleashed a more sophisticated, more dangerous version of it. Around 2 in the morning, my private line rang. A number I didn't recognize. Heart pounding. I answered it. Grandfather. It was Kyle. His voice was a hoarse whisper, choked with tears. Kyle, where are you? Are you all right? I'm at home. In my room. I used a friend's phone. She took mine. Beatrice. What's happening, son? I asked, the term of endearment slipping out before I could stop it. She won't stop, he sobbed. She's been talking for 2 days. She says you've lost your mind. She says you've ruined everything. She says the title is a curse and that I'm not smart enough to handle it, that it'll destroy the family and it will be all my fault. She has papers. She wants me to sign them. Something about a regent. She says she has to take control to protect me from you. She says you're dangerous. My blood ran cold. A regency? It was a medieval concept for a monarch who was a child. She was moving faster than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just going to manipulate him, she was going to legally strip him of his power before he even knew he had it. Kyle, listen to me, I said, my voice urgent. Do not sign anything. Do you understand me? Nothing. Not a single piece of paper. But she says, if I don't, you'll force me to sell the land, to fire all the staff. She says, you hate us, grandfather. She says, this is your revenge. And in that moment, hearing my own motives thrown back at me by my terrified grandson, I felt the full, crushing weight of my sin. He was right. It was my revenge. And he was the instrument. Kyle, I said, my voice breaking. What I did it was complicated, but I need you to trust me. Just for a little while longer. Do not sign her papers. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his ragged breathing. I had asked for his trust, but what had I ever done to earn it? She's coming, he whispered, panic seizing his voice. I have to go. The line went dead. I stood there in the dark, holding the dead phone to my ear. The silence of the manor was no longer just empty. It was accusing. I had lit the fuse, and now the explosion was imminent. Beatrice had Kyle, and she was breaking him, and I was miles away, powerless. I had thought the worst feeling was the betrayal by my children. I was wrong. The worst feeling was being the betrayer, and hearing the consequences of that betrayal in the terrified whisper of a boy I claimed to want to protect. I had to get him out of there. I had to get to him before Beatrice could force him to sign away his future. But how? I was an old man, trapped in my own fortress. The legal wheels turned too slowly. A confrontation would only make things worse. I needed an ally. But who? I had alienated everyone. There was no one left. Or was there? A name flickered in the back of my mind. A dangerous, unpredictable name. Someone who had their own reasons to hate Arthur and Beatrice. Someone who operated outside the rules. Someone I had sworn I would never deal with again. It was a desperate, mad gamble. But I was out of sane options. The war had escalated and I was losing. It was time to call in the reinforcements from hell. I went to my desk, opened a hidden drawer, and pulled out a battered old address book. I flipped through the pages, my finger trembling as I found the name. The number was 20 years old. Would it still work? I picked up the phone and started to dial. Each tone was a step into the abyss. I was about to make a deal with the devil. But to save Kyle from the demons I had unleashed, I would gladly burn. The phone rang once. Twice, and then a voice answered, a voice I hadn't heard in decades, a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. Well, the voice drawled. Alistair Vans? I wondered how long it would take you to call. That voice on the phone, it was a ghost from a past it'd tried to bury. Silas Croftley, Beatrice's ex-husband, Kyle's father. A man had paid a significant sum of money 20 years ago to disappear from our lives forever. He was a gambler, a charmer, a rogue of the highest order, and the last person any sane man would call for help. But sanity had left the building the moment it named Kyle my heir. Desperation makes for strange bedfellows, and I was lying in a bed of my own making, staring at the ceiling of my own personal hell. "Silas," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have to say, Alistair," he drawled, and I could almost see the smirk on his face, the same infuriating smirk that had charmed Beatrice and infuriated me a lifetime ago. "When I heard the news, I thought it was a joke. My Kyle, Lord Hemlocke, you really have lost your marbles, haven't you? This isn't a social call, Silas. Beatrice has him. She's isolating him, poisoning him against me. She's preparing legal documents to make herself his regent." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The smirk vanished from his voice. "What kind of documents?" "I don't know the specifics. But she's moving fast. She's taken his phone. He called me from a friend's, terrified. She's telling him Emin's sane, that HEIR's incompetent, that hell destroy the family." Silas let out a low whistle. "Ah, Beatrice. Still the same loving mother, I see. Using a sledgehammer to crack a nut? And a rather fragile nut at that." His tone shifted, became serious, almost businesslike. "What do you want from me, Alistair? You made it abundantly clear decades ago that my presence in my son's life was undesirable. I want you to get him out of there," I said, the words feeling both shameful and necessary. "Just for a few days. Bring him to Hemlocke. I need to talk to him, away from her. I need him to understand." "Understand what?" Silas shot back, an edge of anger in his voice now. "Understand that you used him as a pawn in your little game of revenge against your children. Understand that you've made him a target for every greedy bastard in the family, including his own mother. What exactly is there to understand, Alistair? That his grandfather is a vindictive old man who set him up for a fall." The truth of his words was a physical blow. I sank into my chair, the receiver slick in my hand. "You think I don't know that?" I whispered, the defiance gone, replaced by raw guilt. "You think I don't lie awake every night seeing the look on his face? This has spiraled far beyond what I intended. I need to fix it. Or, at least, I need to try. But I can't get near him." "You can. Why would I?" Silas asked, his voice cold. "You ruined my life. You took my son from me. And Beatrice ruined yours just as thoroughly," I countered, a last, desperate gambit. "She used you and discarded you when your habits became an inconvenience. She's doing the same to Kyle now. She's not trying to protect him, she's trying to control his inheritance. The inheritance I gave him. The inheritance that, technically, makes him a very wealthy young man. Wealthy enough, perhaps, to help a father down on his luck." The silence on the other end was profound. I had played my card, the money card. It was the only language Silas Croftly had ever truly understood. "How wealthy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Enough," I said. "Get him to me. Safely, and we'll discuss gratitude." I heard him take a deep breath. "Where is he?" "Beatrice's townhouse. In London. You know the one." "I know it," he said, the old bitterness returning. "All right, Alistair. He'll do it. But not for you. For Kyle, and for the gratitude. I'll call you when I have him." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. I had just made a pact with a devil I knew. Was I saving Kyle, or was I simply delivering him from one manipulator to another? The lines were so blurred now I could no longer tell which way was up. I felt a profound sickness in my soul. I was no better than they were. I was just more desperate. The wait was agony. 24 hours passed with no word. I imagined 100 different disasters. Silas getting caught, Beatrice calling the police, Kyle refusing to go with a father he barely remembered. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just paced, a caged animal in a gilded cage of my own design. It was early evening on the second day when my phone finally rang. A blocked number. "Well?" I answered, my heart in my throat. "I've got him," Silas said. He sounded out of breath. It wasn't easy. Beatrice had a bloody security guy at the door. Had to create a distraction. The old fire alarm trick. Classic but effective. Is he all right? Is he hurt? HEIR's scared? Confused? But HEIR's fine. We're in a car. We'll be at your place in a few hours. Thank you, Silas, I said, and for a moment I meant it. Don't thank me yet, he grunted. Just have the checkbook ready. They arrived just after midnight. I heard the car crunch on the gravel drive and I went to the front door, my robe pulled tight against the chill. The car was a nondescript sedan, rental by the look of it. The passenger door opened and Kyle got out. He looked pale, shell-shocked, clutching a small backpack. He looked like a refugee. Then Silas got out from the driver's side. Time had not been kind to him. The handsome rogue was now a gaunt man with thinning hair and lines of dissipation etched deep around his eyes. But the smirk was still there, a ghost of his former charm. Delivery for one Lord Hemlocke, Silas said, spreading his arms wide. Grandfather, Kyle whispered, his voice trembling. He took a hesitant step towards me. It's all right, Kyle, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You're safe here. I ushered them inside, into the library. I poured Kyle a brandy, which he took with shaking hands and drank in one gulp, coughing. Silas helped himself to a generous measure. Right, Silas said, leaning against the mantelpiece. The boy's here. Now. About that gratitude, Kyle, I said, ignoring Silas for a moment. What happened? What did she do? Kyle looked from me to his father and back again, his eyes wide with trauma. She had these papers. A whole folder. She said I had to sign them. For my own protection. She said you were going to have me declared incompetent and have yourself made my guardian anyway, and that this way, at least it would be her, someone who loved me. He started to cry, silent, hopeless tears. She said if I didn't sign, it'd be responsible for destroying the family. She said it'd fail, that everyone would laugh at me. The sickness in my gut intensified. It was worse than I thought. She wasn't just manipulating him, she was emotionally eviscerating him. She's a piece of work, that one, Silas muttered, draining his glass. Always was. You didn't sign anything, did you, Kyle? I asked, my heart pounding. He shook his head. No. I remembered what you said. On the phone, but she was so angry. She took my phone. She locked me in my room. She said I couldn't leave until I signed. He looked at his father. Then Dad showed up. A timely intervention, Silas said with a theatrical bow. Now, Alistair, the matter of my compensation. I turned to him, my patience worn thin. What do you want, Silas? Well, a man can't live on fresh air and fond memories. I was thinking let's call it a consultancy fee. For services rendered, and for future discretion. Say, £200,000. It was extortion. Pure and simple. But I was in no position to refuse. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. Grandfather. No. Kyle said, startling us both. He had stood up, his fists clenched. You can't pay him. That's wrong. Both Silas and I stared at him. It was the first time I had ever seen anything resembling defiance in Kyle. Now, son, Silas said, his smile faltering. Your grandfather and I are just settling a debt. It's not a debt. It's a bribe. Kyle's voice was shaking, but it was loud. You paid him to kidnap me. It wasn't kidnapping, Kyle. It was a rescue. I insisted, but the word paid hung in the air, ugly and true. Was it? Kyle asked, turning his tear-filled eyes on me. The betrayal in them was fresh and far more painful than before. Or was it just another move in your game? You used me to get back at Mum and Uncle Arthur. Now you're using Dad to get me back. Does anyone in this family ever just talk to each other? Does anyone ever just tell the truth? He stood there, breathing heavily, a boy suddenly aged by the corruption around him. And in that moment, I saw him not as a pawn, not as a tool for revenge, but as the only sane person in a room full of madmen. The only person who could see the rot for what it was. Silas laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Listen to the little lord, finding his spine. Well, good for you, son. You're going to need it. He turned back to me. The money, Alistair. Now. Or I walk out that door and the first person I call is Beatrice. I'll tell her exactly where her precious heir is. And I'll tell the press, too. I wonder how a kidnapping charge would look for the new Lord Hemlocke's guardian. It was a checkmate. A vile, disgusting checkmate. I looked at Kyle, at the dawning horror on his face as he realized the true nature of the man who had rescued him. I had to end this, now. "Wait here," I said to Silas. I went to my study, wrote the check with a hand that trembled with rage and self-loathing. I came back and handed it to him. "Now get out." Silas looked at the check, smiled, and tucked it into his pocket. "A pleasure doing business with you, Alistair. Always was." He walked to Kyle, clapped him on the shoulder. "Good luck, son. You're going to need it. You're surrounded by wolves." And with that, he was gone. The sound of his car engine faded into the night, leaving a silence more profound than any that had come before. Kyle and I were alone. He wouldn't look at me. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, the fight gone out of him. "Kyle," I began, but I had no words. What could I say? That I was sorry. It was too paltry, too insignificant. "I want to go to bed," he whispered, his voice empty. I nodded, defeated. "Of course. Your room is made up." He walked out of the library without another word. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, each one a hammer blow on the coffin of my own conscience. I had wanted to protect him, to explain things to him. Instead, I had shown him that his grandfather was just another manipulator willing to trade in cash and lies. I had confirmed every terrible thing Beatrice had told him. I had lost him, not to Beatrice, but to the undeniable truth of my own actions. The next morning, I found him in the breakfast room, picking at some toast. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. "We need to talk, Kyle," I said, sitting down opposite him. "What's left to talk about?" he asked, not looking up. "You hate Mum and Uncle Arthur. They hate you. You used me to hurt them? Dad used you to get money. It's all just hate and money. It started that way," I admitted, the confession torn from me. "I won't lie to you. What I heard them say, the greed it broke me. I wanted to punish them, and yes, I used you to do it. It was a cruel, selfish, terrible thing to do." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Why? Why me?" "Because you thought I was too stupid to care. Because you thought I wouldn't understand." "No," I said, the word bursting out of me. "I chose you because you were the opposite of them, Kyle. Because you were kind. Because you cared about a stray dog when everyone else was caring about their inheritance. Because you were the only one in this damned family who had a heart. I didn't give you the title to tarnish it. I gave it to you because I thought, in my twisted, angry way, that you were the only one who could save it from becoming what they wanted it to be. It was the first completely honest thing I had said to him since this nightmare began. The truth, raw and unvarnished." He stared at me, my words slowly sinking in. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a profound confusion. "Save it? How can I save it? She's right, you know. Mum, I don't know how to do any of this. It'll mess it up." "Then well, learn," I said, leaning forward, grasping at this fragile thread of connection. "Together. I might be a vengeful old fool, but I know this estate. I know the title. I know the responsibilities. I can teach you. Not to be like them, to be better than them, to be better than me." It was a plea. A desperate, last-ditch plea for redemption. Not for the estate, not for the title, but for a relationship with my grandson. For a chance to undo some of the harm I had caused. Kyle was silent for a long time. He looked out the window at the sprawling lawns of Hemlocke, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He was no longer just Kyle, the embarrassing grandson. He was Lord Hemlocke. And he had a choice to make. Would he run from it? Would he let his mother control it? Or would he, against all odds, try to rise to the occasion? He turned back to me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen before. A flicker of resolve. It was small, and it was scared, but it was there. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Okay? Teach me." It was a beginning. A fragile, uncertain beginning. But it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of something that wasn't anger or despair. It was hope. But hope, in the house of Vans, is a fleeting thing. It was shattered an hour later when my phone rang. It was Mr. Thistlethwaite, and he sounded panicked. "My lord," he stammered, "if just been served. Papers from Beatrice's solicitors. And Arthur's. They're contesting the will. Jointly. a joint contest. They had overcome their differences. They had united against a common enemy, me and Kyle. On what grounds? I asked, my mouth dry. On the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, Thistlethwaite said. They're claiming that Lord Kyle manipulated you, that he preyed on your fragile mental state to get you to sign over the estate. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. They were claiming that Kyle, the most gentle and unassuming boy imaginable, was a master manipulator. They were going to drag him through the mud, paint him as a predatory opportunist. It was monstrous, but that's absurd. I finally spluttered. They have a witness, my lord, Thistlethwaite said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. A witness who is prepared to testify that he saw Kyle exerting pressure on you, that he heard Kyle discussing the inheritance with you in a threatening manner. What witness? I demanded, a cold dread filling me. Silas Croftley, Thistlethwaite said. The world tilted on its axis. Silas, the man I had just paid off. He had taken my money, driven away, and immediately gone to my enemies to sell a lie for what was undoubtedly an even larger price. He had played me perfectly. He had known I was desperate. He had known I would pay. And he had known that his testimony would be worth a fortune to Arthur and Beatrice. I ended the call and sank into a chair. I looked at Kyle, who was watching me, his face pale. What is it? He asked. I couldn't speak. How could I tell him? How could I tell him that his own father had not only sold him out for cash, but was now actively conspiring to destroy him in a court of law? That the man who had rescued him was now the star witness for the prosecution. The game was over. The war had entered a new, more vicious phase. And this time, the attack wasn't just on me. It was on Kyle. They were coming for him with everything they had. They were going to try to legally annihilate him. I had wanted to teach my children a lesson about greed, but I had only taught them how to be more ruthless. I had taken a kind boy and made him the central figure in a legal battle that would tear him to pieces. I had handed the weapons to his enemies myself. I had thought the lowest point was signing the will. I was wrong. The lowest point was right now, watching the hope die in my grandson's eyes as he waited for me to tell him what new hell awaited us. I had sought to tarnish a title. Instead, I had tarnished a soul, and the cost was going to be higher than I had ever imagined. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed through the silent house. It was too early for visitors. Mrs. Higgins went to answer it. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. My lord, she said, it's the police. They wish to speak with Master Kyle. Kyle looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it stopped my heart. The police. Beatrice and Arthur weren't waiting for the civil courts. They were going for the jugular. And new influence could border on criminal fraud. They were moving to have him arrested, or at least questioned, to create a public spectacle that would seal his fate in the court of public opinion before the legal battle even began. Don't say a word, I hissed at Kyle, grabbing his arm. Not a single word without a solicitor present. Do you understand me? He nodded, mute with fear. I walked into the grand entrance hall, my cane tapping a frail rhythm that belied the storm raging inside me. Two police officers stood there, their uniforms a stark, authoritarian contrast to the opulent surroundings. Lord Hemlocke, the older one said, I'm Inspector Miller. We're here to speak with Kyle Croftley regarding allegations of financial coercion against Alistair Vans. My grandson has nothing to say, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of age and fury. These allegations are a malicious fiction concocted by his mother and uncle who are contesting a perfectly legal will. Be that as it may, sir, the inspector said, his tone polite but inflexible, we have a duty to investigate. Would like him to come down to the station to answer a few questions, voluntarily, for now. For now? I echoed. Are you threatening to arrest him? We're asking for his cooperation, the other officer said. It's in his best interests to clear this up. It was a trap. Every word he said would be twisted. Every stumble, every nervous hesitation would be used as evidence of his guilt. Silas' testimony would give them just enough to make it plausible. The kindly, confused old grandfather manipulated by his scheming, incompetent grandson. It was a narrative the public would devour. He will not be cooperating without his solicitor present, I said, drawing myself up to my full height. And I can assure you, any attempt to take him from this house will be met with the full force of my legal team. The inspector sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. Sir, we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. We have a sworn statement from a witness. A witness I paid £200,000 to yesterday. I roared, my composure shattering. A witness who is a known gambler and extortionist. Are you truly so blind? The two officers exchanged a glance. My outburst had likely just cemented their belief that I was the addled old man they'd been told about. We're aware of Mr. Croftly's history, Inspector Miller said carefully, which is why we need to speak with your grandson, to get his side of the story. It was a losing battle. I was making it worse. I could feel the situation spiraling out of control. I turned and saw Kyle standing at the top of the stairs, having followed me out. He looked like a ghost. Kyle, I said, my voice breaking. Go back to the library, now. But it was too late. The inspector saw him, Mr. Croftly, Inspector Miller. Would appreciate it if you'd come with us. Kyle descended the stairs slowly, each step in agony. He stopped beside me. I could feel him shaking. I didn't do anything, he whispered, his voice barely audible. We just want to talk, the inspector said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a scene from my worst nightmare. The heir to Hemlocke being led away by the police. The scandal would be immense. The damage, irreversible. I had to stop it. Wait, I said, a desperate idea forming. If you need a statement about my state of mind, take mine. Question me. I'm the alleged victim, am I not? Take me to the station. The inspectors were taken aback. This was not standard procedure. Lord Hemlocke, that's not necessary, Miller began. I insist. I barked. You want to know if I was coerced, if I was of sound mind? Then ask me. Or are you only interested in persecuting a 19-year-old boy based on the word of a paid liar? There was a long, tense silence. Kyle was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something like gratitude. Very well, Inspector Miller said finally, clearly unhappy with this turn of events. If you'll come with us voluntarily, we can take your statement at the station. I nodded. I turned to Kyle. Stay here. Lock the doors. Do not speak to anyone. Thistlethwaite will be here soon. I squeezed his shoulder, a feeble attempt at reassurance. It's going to be all right. I didn't believe it for a second. The ride to the police station was a blur. I sat in the back of the car, watching my ancestral lands pass by, wondering if this was the last time I would see them as a free man. They wouldn't arrest me, surely, but the humiliation was a prison in itself. The story would be everywhere by noon, aged lord questioned in inheritance scandal. At the station, they put me in a small, sterile interview room. It smelled of bleach and despair. Thistlethwaite arrived, flustered and apologetic. The questioning began. They were polite but relentless. They asked about my relationship with Kyle. They asked about the will. They presented Silas' statement, a pack of lies so convincing it took my breath away. He claimed to have heard Kyle bullying me, threatening to have me put in a home if I didn't change the will. He claimed I was confused, frightened of my own grandson. I denied it all, of course. I told them the truth. About the greed of Arthur and Beatrice. About my own desire for revenge. I held nothing back. I painted myself as the villain, hoping to exonerate Kyle. I thought if I could show them that the manipulation was all mine, that Kyle was an innocent pawn, they would see reason. But the more I talked, the more I saw the doubt in their eyes. My confession of revenge sounded like the ramblings of a bitter old man. My defense of Kyle sounded like the desperate lies of a doting grandfather who had been duped. I was digging my own grave, and Kyle's. After 3 hours, they let me go. No further action at this time, Inspector Miller said, but his tone made it clear this was far from over. The file was open. The investigation was active. Thistleweight drove me back to Hemlocke in silence. The weight of the world was on my shoulders. I had failed, miserably. When we arrived, the manor was surrounded. Reporters, photographers, a media scrum. They descended on the car like vultures, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, shouting questions. Lord Hemlocke, is it true your grandson forced you to change the will? Are you a victim of elder abuse? Where is Kyle? Is he under arrest? Thistleweight fought his way through them, and we managed to get inside, slamming the door on the cacophony. The house was dark and silent. Kyle, I called out, my voice echoing in the vast hall. No answer. A cold fear gripped me. Had they gotten to him? Had Beatrice come and taken him while I was gone? I found him in the library. He was sitting in my chair behind the great oak desk. He wasn't crying. He wasn't panicking. He was just sitting there, staring at the wall. And in his hand he held a letter. A heavy, cream-colored envelope with a familiar crest. The House of Lords. It came for me, he said, his voice flat, empty. While you were gone? Official correspondence. Addressed to Lord Hemlocke. He looked up at me, and the look in his eyes was one I had never seen before. It was beyond sadness, beyond fear. It was a kind of hollowed-out resignation. They've frozen the assets, he said, tossing the letter onto the desk, pending the outcome of the criminal and civil investigations. I can't access a penny. The estate accounts are frozen. The staff salaries, everything. The final blow. Arthur and Beatrice had used their connections. They had strangled us financially. Without access to funds, we couldn't pay our legal team. We couldn't fight back. We were besieged from the outside and bankrupt on the inside. I slumped into the chair opposite him, the last of my fight draining away. I had wanted a war, and I had gotten one. But I was an old general with no army, no supplies, and a territory that was crumbling around me. I had led us to ruin. I'm sorry, Kyle, I whispered. It was all I had left. I'm so sorry. He didn't respond. He just stared at the letter on the desk, at the official seal that represented a world that had rejected him before had even set foot in it. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant shouts of the reporters outside. We were prisoners in our own home. The title was tarnished. The legacy was in ruins, and the boy I had sought to protect was broken. I had achieved my revenge. I had made the Vans name a laughingstock, but the joke was on me, because the person I had hurt the most was the only one who had ever deserved anything better. I thought that was the end, the final, crushing defeat. But I was wrong, because Kyle, the boy I thought I had broken, was about to show me that even the most tarnished metal can have a core of steel. He looked up from the letter, and his eyes met mine. And in their depths, the ember of resolve I had seen earlier now ignited into a steady, cold flame. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the despair like a knife. I'm not going to let them win.